Today, the Anglo-List would like to welcome Advocate Boaz Gork back. We discussed previously the issues of family law in Israel. Today we'll be talking about children, abduction. Welcome, Boaz. Great to see you again.
Great to see you, Suzanne.
Let's talk specifically about children. Children in a divorce. They need protection. What are their rights? Do they have a say? How does it work with kids?
Yes. I think that is the most sensitive issue in any divorce case, is the issue of children. It's actually the rights of children within the divorce are sometimes, this sentence contradicts itself. Why? It's like talking about the rights of prisoners of war.
Okay.
I would put it even like that. Divorce is devastating for children.
Absolutely.
Divorce is a devastating thing for children, more than anything else. So that is something we have to take in mind, and us as lawyers, I think, have to know and be aware of this, of how hard it could be on them.
So what is the court's main
Yes.
concern in
Yes.
terms of the children's
So that is
well-being?
why. Well, despite, I will mention what the court is what is the court's most important concern, and I think it's very important. As I mentioned, divorce is very hard for children. It's devastating. The main concern in a situation of separation between spouses is that the court will see to it that the parent, who is the custodian, will do every kind of effort that there will be a good relationship with the other spouse. A main point of deliberation of the court with who it will be better for the children to live would be with which spouse can we maintain the best possible connection with the other parent who is not living with the child. And if there is even the smallest danger of alienation, we know that the child must be careful. It will be a serious consideration in the issue of custody. The most important thing is to see to it that both spouses will have a very strong connection with the children, and the fact that they are separating will not harm this bond, this natural bond between parents and their children.
So the court is putting the child's emotional needs above all else.
Yes, that is correct. Another aspect which is an outcome of that, and which is a quite new thing here in Israel, but I find it important to emphasize, is the idea of joint custody. Usually, until now, the children were in custody of one of the spouses, in majority of the times of the mother. More and more the court today are seeing importance that both parents should be custodians, so both of them could have a good and maintain a good relationship with their children also after separation.
Can I just point out here that we're talking about minor children?
Yes, it's important, of course, to emphasize the fact that, I mean, a child is considered a minor child under the age of 18. After 18, he's already
an adult.
He's an adult, and he decides for himself. But that is the most important thing, the relationship with the other spouse. And that is the main consideration of the court.
Who speaks on their behalf? You say that an adult child gets to make his own choice and his own point of view. Who speaks for the child? Do the parents speak for the child? Is there a guardian? Is there?
Yes, well, that's really is a problem, because, for instance, let's say the parents are disputing the issue of custody. Many times when the parents come into this dispute, for instance, a wife would object joint custody, not because she thinks it's bad for the children, but because she thinks it would harm the issue of child support. You won't get as much child support. And thus, who will really hear the child? Maybe the child would feel much better in the case of joint custody. So there are ways in which the court sees to it that the child's voice will be heard. But where you have to take into consideration, if the child is, let's say, under the age of 8, it's very hard to hear him.
Right.
So in this case, what the court usually does today is appoint a psychologist. A good psychologist, a part of his or her task would to visit the children and to see the dynamics of them with both spouses, and thus to get to understand from the children's behavior in play, in talk. Also, they could talk to children, special child psychologists, and see what they really need. When a child becomes a bit older, like from the age of 9, 10 or 11, also it's very, very important to talk to the children themselves and to hear them, to physically hear them, and to see how they would like to see what would be the best possible outcome for them after separation. And they would be heard, they would be physically heard, and we would like to know what they want and how they want their life to be after separation.
And would that also be under the supervision of a psychologist?
Definitely. It always has to be, until the minor is at the age of 18, it has to be under the supervision of a children's psychologist. Many times a social worker is appointed for this issue who has this practice. Despite this fact, the court now tends more and more to have psychologists, children's psychologists, involved in what is good for the child. And I think that's a very good thing, because I think we have to have somebody who is a bit more than a social worker, somebody who has practiced as a child psychologist to really hear the child and the child's needs.
Great point of view. Okay. Can you please explain what constitutes abduction?
Abduction is considered in law taking the child out of his usual habitat, his usual place of living, to another country. It usually happens when the spouse has family in another country, usually, not always, but usually, and the spouse decides, for one, to separate from the husband or wife, according to the circumstances, and to create a situation where the child will be with him or her and disconnect the child from the spouse.
So this could be a common issue or something that might happen in Israel, where you have so many immigrant families. That's and
that is correct.
Their support systems are abroad.
That is correct. That's a very interesting issue what you point out here. Yes, it's very common in Israel, because in this country really many people have their family abroad, and it's very, very common. It's a very common thing here in Israel. For instance, lately I handled a case of abduction to the United States. Cases from South Africa there was lately, and these things are quite common. Yes.
Okay, so what happens to the child who's been abducted by a parent? Who protects them, and what are their rights?
Well, in a case of abduction by the child, here there is a special agreement, a special document called the Hague Convention. The Hague Convention was a document, order signed by countries, most of the Western countries, mostly from the Western Hemisphere, acknowledging the fact that they need to assist each other in cases like this, because abduction is two ways. A child can be abducted from England to Israel, from Israel to England, or from any other country, and the countries acknowledge the importance that they, even though they might have not a good relationship between each other as countries, it's important that they work together in bringing abducted children back. Thus, every country who signed on this convention is obliged to see to it, with the national authority of the other country, that the child who is abducted will be brought back to his natural habitat within a very, very short period of time.
Okay, so which countries are signed into the convention that are relevant for us. America,
Well,
England.
yes. Well, as I said, most of the countries in the Western Hemisphere are signed on this convention. For instance, most of the states in the United States of America, most of them, not all, are signed. England, Germany, France, most of the countries in Europe, South Africa, of course.
For our Anglo community, New Zealand.
Australia, all these countries are signed on the convention. There are countries who are not signed. One of the major countries where there is a serious problem is Russia, and what was previously known as the Soviet Union, like Russia, Ukraine, Lithuania, Azerbaijan, many other countries in that area are not signed on this convention, and serious problems had occurred due to the fact there was a famous case, not a case in which I handled, but there was a case about 5 years ago where the wife was Russian, told the husband she's going to visit her family in Russia for a short time. She took the child with her and she didn't come back, and it was impossible. The husband did not see the child for about 7 to 8 years.
Wow.
I did not handle this case. Maybe if I would have handled it, the outcome would have been different. Yes, but that is what, it's a big problem when it comes to these countries. There are ways to handle it, but it's much more complicated. And I really hope that in the future, also these countries will sign this very, very important convention.
When a child is abducted, your lawyer needs to play a very special part in their safe return. And this is a very serious and complicated issue, so you really should ensure that your attorney is a specialist in this field. Is that correct?
Definitely. You have to have a lawyer who is an expert in family law. Usually lawyers who are expert in family law deal with abduction. And yes, it's very important to be familiar of the laws concerning the issues of abduction and how to achieve in a very short period of time the return of the child to his habitat.
Okay. Is there a period from the time that the child is abducted that you can lay a charge of abduction? Is there? Can I come along 5 years later and say, well, my spouse took the child and now I...
Yes. Well, usually in law, a period of a year has to elapse. It could be the maximum. But again, it's up to the discretion of the court. The usual is a year, because the main thing about abduction is there was no consent. If, for instance, 5 years later the spouse would come and claim for abduction, we would say, where were you 5 years? You didn't say anything. So maybe this could be considered in many times consent to the fact that the child was took with, and it was not without consent, but with consent. And this constitutes this fact. It's up to the discretion of the court again, the period of time in which we would already consider it as consent, as opposing to abduction.
I understand. So just for our viewers, we really are very concerned about our children and their emotional well-being, and they need support and a sympathetic ear. So we are including in this video a list of resources and helplines for children, for families. It will be listed in the video.
I'm very happy you're doing that, Suzanne. I'm very happy. I think it's very important.
I thank you very much for your time. And for all people that are watching this video, you'll find more articles written by Boaz on the Anglo list and on his website. His contact information, you'll be able to find it at the end of this video.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. It's been a pleasure being with you today.